Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this week's Radix Space. First of all, my name is Adam Simmons. It is a pleasure to be here. And joining me is Cam from the Hyperlane team. Cam, hopefully you've got speaker and are able to hear us.
Yep, loud and clear. Hey,
Aw-
everybody.
Awesome. So, Cam, why don't we kick off with a quick introduction of yourself? People here are probably quite familiar with who I am. It'd be great to get you tied up.
Yeah, sure. Um, Based in the States, if you couldn't tell by my accent compared to Adam's. But I'm on Eastern time zone in Miami. I'm head of ecosystem here at Hyperlane and very excited to be on this space. And, Adam and I have been, hammering out the details and whatnot over the past few months on an implementation, and we're right here at the finish line. It's gone as planned, which can't always be said in these types of endeavors. So happy to be here and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I mean, it has been a hectic couple of months. Can you? But I was working it out. It was just after consensus we were introduced, Cam. So it has been breakneck speed, and I've got to say, from the Radix side, it has been such a pleasure working with the Hyperlane team and yourselves, and really excited for the things we've got coming through. And I can see all of the hearts being spammed in the space as well. It looks like the Radix ecosystem is also very happy you're here.
Good. Good to hear. Happy we can help. And I think this is just the beginning, right?
It is indeed, and we're getting very close to the line. So I've literally just jumped off a call with your technical team, Cam. So going through the final details and kind of mainnet launch plans and everything there. So all very exciting. But I know you've got some time constraints today. So let's dive straight into things. So, I mean, really the purpose of this space for anyone tuning in is to learn more about Hyperlane, what it's bringing with the integration with Radix, why open permissionless bridges are so important, and why having the first one integrating Radix, Hyperlane, is going to really be a game changer for the ecosystem. So, Cam, my first question is obviously, unlike traditional bridges, Hyperlane is permissionless and modular, and is one of the big kind of selling points you have. Could you give a brief explanation on kind of what that means in practice and why it's such a big advantage for both developers and
Yeah,
users?
sure. So Hyperlink was the first permissionless interoperability layer that allows smart contract developers to send arbitrary data between blockchains. So we are general message passing, otherwise colloquially known as GMP, you might see the acronym. So, general message passing, it's pretty straightforward. It means, we support 150 plus chains across all these different virtual machine environments. If you're one of the chains that we support, Radix, if they're 151, then that means you have coverage, right? And connectability to send messages between any of the other chains we support, regardless of virtual machine environment, right? So whether that's Solana or Starknet or BitTensor or Celestia or Cosmos or whatever that is, right? Or Etherbase, of course, the standard EVM fathead chains as well. So just to note that, so we are general message passing. I think product market fit still has been token bridging. So we have, warp routes, which are token bridging products, which is probably what most people think of when think of, Hyperlane or some of our competitors or, bridging in general. But there are many use cases for general message passing. Aave uses us for cross-chain governance. Velodrome and Aerodrome utilize us for their cross-chain, cross-asset swap, super swaps feature. They use us for cross-chain voting and gauges because they have a voting escrow of the E33 model DEX. TauFi on BitTensor, utilized our ICAs to abstract away the user experience to essentially allow people to operate on Solana wallets, to purchase BitTensor tokens. Anyways, just to give you some examples that are out there that are outside of just the traditional token bridging concept. Although, I think what is still like product market fit and most important is facilitating flows in and out and liquidity in and out of our partners' chains, right? It's a really big use case, but I hope that outside of that, there's also, the Radix community and all of the developers who are working with Radix VM and things like that now have this whole toolbox that's available when it comes to message passing and otherwise. That's been a big, differentiator for us at Hyperlane is we're building open source tooling, right? We're open source, we're permissionless. That's the big differentiator compared to, our other big competitors. We're building a modular, toolkit framework, if you will, for developers. We've been very developer focused. We are making some consumer-facing products, or at least tooling that is more geared towards user experience and UX and things like that. But that's, I think, the best way to describe what makes us different. And being permissionless, although we do a lot of managed deployments, white glove, if you will, and helping people along. You have the ability to get started with Hyperlane, and within 3 steps, just identify your VM, deploy Hyperlane core infrastructure, and create your own warp routes, as you wish, right? Adam could, I could, anybody on this spaces could. So we have a command line interface for automated deployment. You can configure all your security settings, and being modular inherently, I think, provides flexibility and allows people to use this toolkit in a kind of building blocks kind of way, right? You can choose off the menu if you like, what kind of security setup you might need, things of this nature for verification, what kind of token standards you might want to use. There's no vendor lock-in with Hyperlane, as opposed to many of our competitors. We support third-party token standards. So I'll kind of stop there, but hopefully that gives you an overview of what I think is important and compelling, to partners like yourself and hopefully builders on Radix as well.
Super good elevator pitch there, Cam. You can tell you've done this before. And I mean, I can just echo, I won't drop any names, but some people in the Radix ecosystem have already been looking at the stack, and doing some integrations, getting prepared for it. Some here may get some educated guesses to who that may be, but they've only had incredibly positive things to say. So your developer focus is definitely resonating and working well. One kind of follow up to that is, so you mentioned around kind of like the non-bridging side applications. So obviously token bridging is something that I'm sure everyone on this space will be really familiar with. Could you explain a bit more, especially there's many devs in Radix here, on like some of these other applications, like you mentioned, cross-chain governance with Aave, etc. Just how they are typically implemented in the other use cases you see?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I touched on some of it. Aave is a household name, right? We're one of a few different general message passing providers that they use for cross-chain governance. Whenever they, have a proposal that's in place on, say, a base market, right? Then there's governance that has to happen on ETH1, and they have to, the way that they're set up is they submit those transactions, and there has to be message passing back and forth. But a big part of this is like cross-chain contract calls, right? Like the Talfi example I kind of spoke to there. Um, you know, Anyways, I don't want to speak about a different chain too much, but there's a lot of speculation with Subtensor. It was a very difficult environment to be able to reach. We did this kind of bespoke VM deployment similar to what we're doing with Radix. And then based on this thing we have called ICAs, or interchain accounts, we're able to otherwise, have this builder look at our docs. They asked us certain questions. We have a Telegram group, et cetera, but really deploy on their own and create this, user abstracted experience where they're able to go, you know, have tokens in a wallet on another chain that's difficult to work with, and then essentially settle into one asset, automatically bridge that asset over to another chain, and then once it gets onto that other chain, automatically swap that asset into their desired asset on the destination chain. So there's a multitude of different use case. I mean, the other thing is intent protocols, right? Like, we are not an intent protocol necessarily in terms of like having a solver and whatnot, but many intent-based protocols utilize our message passing for rebalancing, right? If they have collateral in different places that they need when they have these intents that they solve in different places. We have a close partner called Eco, um, who facilitates an intent-like experience for cross-asset swaps, cross-chain cross-asset swaps, and they utilize us under the hood, right? Relay is somebody else that you might know who also utilizes us. Everclear is a partner that you might know, formerly known as Connext, who utilizes Hyperlane message passing for all the rebalancing that they do in the batching of their transactions, for their settlement. So um, we're trying to get our tentacles everywhere, if you know what I mean. We're an infrastructure project, so a lot of this happens on the back end. But as I mentioned, I think we're making great strides to utilize the tooling that we have to present an optimized user experience, because I think that that's also super important, right? When it comes to like chains and people like Radix, yeah.
100%, and it's one of the reasons why we're very keen on the integration and well when we spoke originally. You mentioned like obviously developer support and things like that. Do you want to give a quick shout out to where people go for developer support? Just because I can see a lot of our Radix developers are in here, and I'm sure you've just given them a bunch of ideas. So if they did want to learn more about Hyperlane, where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, I mean, Hyperlane.xyz. We pride ourselves on our docs, as we should, building open source software, right? And being developer focused. I think we have a quite intuitive interface on our docs page. That said, we are focusing on content. We have a specific, people on our team that are focused on developer marketing. We have people like Fabian, who you know very well at this point, Adam,
Yep.
and his team, who are at this point, I hope, Radix experts or close to it, I think. And otherwise, open DMs all around. Like, I think you've already made some introductions. So I would also kind of throw it back to you, Adam, to talk to Adam,
Of
talk to
course.
your Radix
Yep.
representative, and we'll make sure to make that connection. But we want to help as many people as possible, right? Like, what's important to us is flows. We want the more messages to be sent, the better. And I think this is the tip of the iceberg for what's possible. It sounds like, right, for you guys.
100%. And I mean, like the big thing that really stood out to me is the sheer number of chains that you're already supporting. So like 150 plus. Like how have you gone about that in a relatively short space of time? Like, am I correct in thinking that you support the most VMs of any messaging layer, or at least
Yeah,
definitely up there?
yeah, that's correct. I think part of it was, bet, a somewhat contrarian bet, maybe at the early stage of Hyperlane, on the long tail, um, and a consistency and persistence to explore these other avenues, right? Um, I think it's of course true that there are some power laws at play, and like there's a few, like, it can be top heavy, let's say that, right?
Yep.
Of these few chains that kind of sit where much of the activity is, but a part of that is a little bit of a chicken and egg, right? Like, a part of that is like, well, how much activity could there be on these long tail chains if they had the infrastructure, right? And the interoperability that could facilitate the kind of things that they would otherwise want to accomplish, or that their developers could accomplish. So we've taken, a considered bet there on the longer tail, and then also focused on, some of these non-standard alternative virtual machine environments, right? Like Radix, right? I mean, I think that's another differentiator. Yeah, we support 150 chains, but also, as I mentioned earlier, that means that within those chains, you know, once Radix is there, that means you guys can send messages for any of these contexts that I provided, whether it's just sending tokens back and forth or using interchain accounts for remote chains, contract calls, things like that. I mean, but that extends to any VM we support, right? So once Radix is enshrined, people can send messages from Radix to Solana, from ethel1 to Base, to Starknet with Cairo, which was pretty difficult, but we did that. We're the only interoperability provider that was able to kind of crack that nut, if you will. BitTensor, we were the first on Hyperliquid EVM, et cetera. So I get if that makes sense. Like, it's been a part of our core strategy as a company
Mhm.
to make sure that we focused on providing coverage here, because we see opportunity.
And I mean, it seems to be working fantastically well because, of course, for those who don't know, it's $8 billion of token swaps so far, total volume for Hyperlane.
Yeah, I think we're getting, yes, let's say that. I'll be conservative.
Yeah,
I'm at the end of the day, I'm a sales guy, so I try to, but we'll,
yeah,
we'll say eight. Yeah.
we'll say eight, but I mean that was the number I got from your team about a week or two ago, so I suspect it's a bit higher than that now. So, but yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, incredible achievement. And I've got to ask a fun question. So you said you briefly mentioned that Radix, 150 chains, and now Radix is Radix actually the 151st?
You know, I think you're like the 157th or something.
Ah, that's a
So
shame.
maybe a little bit less cool,
The,
but
the nerd in me
the
was the
example,
original
is effective.
151 Pokemon. I was like, yeah,
Oh,
just stop
okay.
there, like
Yeah.
151. Yeah, but no, that's really awesome. So, I mean, the integration's been going on for a while now. We've had a fantastic experience with your team on getting this integration in place on incredible timelines, like the speed that Fabian and the others got up to speed with the Radix tech and basically were shipping was incredible. But for those who maybe are less familiar with this, is like from a Hyperlane architecture standpoint, what does an integration with a new L1, especially with a new VM, look like under the hood? Like, what are the kind of the main components, the things that go into that from the Hyperlane side?
Yeah, I mean, there's scoping, there's a certain amount of like competence that, every VM can be different, right? Smart contract languages, is it Rust, is it C, is it TypeScript, is it Python, is it, et cetera. But one thing that kind of caught our attention, about Radix was like just generally the untraditional architecture, and that a lot of the security is handled on the VM level was very interesting. Speaking to Fabian and the team, and it actually had us kind of rethink how we implement Hyperlane, to be honest. Because although we have these different VM chains, let's say we have 7 different virtual machines, the lion's share of those are still EVM, right? So it was kind of an eye-opening experience for us to, and a learning experience in a good way, right? For our team's competency as well to go through this process um, with you guys. So there's an onboarding process. We have to make sure the Hyperlane spec is functional, that a message can be dispatched and processed. That Radix is supported by our validator and our relayer, which is like core infrastructure that we need to pass these messages so that it can be dispatched and processed and be automated. And then really, the crux of it is like having Radix supported in our tooling so that a deployment can be done using our CLI in a permissionless manner, like we spoke about earlier, so that any of your core team's developers or any developers in your ecosystem can interact with Radix using the SDK. And then we also have our front end, right? So making sure that users can bridge tokens using usenexus.org, which is our main kind of front-facing, consumer-facing product there for token bridging specifically. And then, there's the usual like audits and test net deployments and mainnet deployments and things like that. But um, yeah, hopefully that gives an overview, kind of from my perspective, at least on my end of what goes into this. It's probably simplified in how I just described it. So I want to give my team, Fabian and his team especially, like a shout out because it's not that simple. But ex- asking the head of BD to explain it in terms like that, I'll kind of stop there. But honestly, it's been a pleasant experience. Everything that I've understood working with Radix VM, we've been pleasantly surprised. You never know when you go into these, right? Like,
Oh,
is substrate easy? Is I don't know. It depends who you ask. So, um,
it's one of the
but it's
biggest
gone well so
challenges.
far.
One of the biggest challenges we have at Radix having a novel VM is obviously without naming any names or things like you speak to any integrators or dApps or anything like that in the industry that are already established, and it's really interesting because back in like when Radix was first going live in 2021 and stuff, it's like, oh, you're a non-EVM, and that was like people would almost like walk away at that point to being like, oh, you're not EVM, not even concerned about this. In the last few years, that's really changed, and that's almost been like, oh, are you EVM? And if you answer no, it's a positive, but we still see so much PTSD from developers of being like, oh, because they've had an experience with a non-EVM integration before, and it's been very, very painful. And that first week, we love it. Even if the other side, it's a bit of a nerve wracking experience for them, but we love it because every time it happens for the Radix side, is you just see people properly digging into the Radix stack, looking at this, and some of the, as you said, around like getting your head around and challenging some of the expectations of or assumptions of how things are done. And what's done at the VM level, things like security and auth and stuff like that, they have what we call the Radix revelation, and they start going, "Damn, that's really cool. That's really cool." And then it clicks, and then that penny drop moment is like, it then just goes so smoothly after that, and that's a big credit to like Fabian and the team. And I've told them privately as well, but tell you as well, Cam, so you can share it. But like a few people, since the code was open sourced by your side last week, I know a few of the devs in the Radix community have taken a look. Some have tweeted publicly about it. Some have messaged me privately about just how solid it looks and what great work has been done in such a short time frame. So yeah, massive congratulations to the Hyperlane team on that. It's fantastic. Um, so kind of moving away from the dev side of things, obviously when Hyperlane is live on the Radix mainnet, what are kind of the main things that unlocks that the Radix ecosystem maybe hasn't had before? Obviously, not having a permissionless, trustless bridge.
I, you know, I think we've touched on some of the use cases, and I can dive a little bit deeper again. But I have to say, like, having fast, safe, secure, efficient flows of liquidity from a user experience perspective into Radix, I think is incredibly important, right? Especially for those major asks, USDC, USDT, ETH, RapidTC, things of that nature. You need, I've spoken to many chains, and even if you're an NFT chain or you're a gaming chain or you're, whatever, metaverse or whatever it is, like you need DeFi. You need the pipes to work for for anything else on blockchain generally to happen. So getting those flows available in one single user interface that everyone can trust, and has finality that's 8 to 10 seconds, and has fees that are on the low end, and otherwise facilitating that, I think is like the big kind of bottom of the pyramid, right? Of the foundation there. Um, and then from that, all that liquidity can flow, and then there's deals with, DeFi integration, blending protocol, DEX pools, et cetera. Again, we're permissionless. Like anybody can create warp routes first and foremost, using the command line interface and looking through our docs. And we try to make it as simple as possible. All these different use cases we pointed out with interchain accounts and cross-chain governance or any of this stuff can also be explored. But I think the really big crux of this, especially at the beginning, is just like opening the hose, if you know what I mean. like
100%. I mean,
allow
like,
or like blocking the traffic or the highways open, whatever you want to say, right? Autobahn, like it's totally available for everyone.
and I think it's a massive thing for the Radix side. So obviously, up until now, the only way to bridge assets into the Radix ecosystem was via a kind of centralized bridging service that had
Right.
like
Yeah.
high friction. Let's just put it that way. To be able to do so, it only supported Ethereum mainnet. So it's kind of a double whammy here for the Radix ecosystem, especially on DeFi. Is A, having this permissionless open layer to be able to bridge in already, massive win. Secondly, having a lot more chains rather than just coming from Ethereum mainnet. And then I'd say the third bit, even just from a bridging perspective, is all of these additional assets and all these additional routes through just gives so much more that can occur. So currently, like if you wanted to have on Radix, there is no easy way to have, say, like a BTC soul pair, for example. Once Hyperlane is live, that's something that can get implemented once there's a warp route there. The other bit for the Hyperlane side, and it's more just for everyone in the Radix community, if they're living under a rock, obviously alongside Hyperlane going live, we're going to be launching the Radix incentives program. So we're going to have 1 billion XRD worth of incentives, and I expect a very large amount of this to go towards assets bridged over through Hyperlane, put into liquidity pools traded, money markets, etc. So it just creates a whole avenue of more opportunity of things that can be done on chain that simply weren't possible before or were very high friction before. So I think it's a massive game changer for the Radix ecosystem. And
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And just to note, to kind of carry on that, like you have your incentive campaign, and we have our Hyperlane expansion rewards. I don't know if everyone's familiar, but they're programmatic. They are doled out every quarter. They're pro rata insofar as, if, for example, you represent 20% of the activity for, quarter 4 on Hyperlane, you get 20% of the quarterly rewards. It's in our Hyper token. It's really like no strings attached on that case. They're fully liquid. Um, and it's around 2% of our total supply every quarter, which is maybe higher than I would have even wanted, to be honest.
the,
But
the,
it's a
the
lot. So
yeah,
hopefully,
BD guy
you
there is going
guys
like
can
that's
take
that's a lot.
advantage. I mean, you can do the math, take our FDV to, multiply it by 0.02, and you can see how much every quarter moving forward is available there. And then otherwise, we also, because, we're a canonical partner with Radix, anything that happens on activity with Radix gets a 20% boost on top of that. So they're even boosted even more. So hopefully that's a pretty compelling pitch, um, for anyone hoping to kind of move, liquidity back and forth, hopefully into Radix there. So we can put together, well, I'm sure we'll have a very compelling go-to-market kind of incentive campaign that we can continue to highlight with a call to action there. But I think all of your users are very well positioned for it to be a fruitful endeavor.
100%, and we're keen to support that on both sides. So definitely great opportunities there. Cam, I know you're quite pressed for time today, so kind of two final closing out questions. One a bit of a longer one, and then the final one is just a quick one. So the slightly longer one is a big thing for all bridges, all messaging layers, and things like that. Basically, DLTs in general. Obviously, comes back to security. So, like at a high level, what is the Hyperlane security model? Essentially, keeping funds and messaging layers safe.
Yeah, sure. So this is, I mean, goes back to our kind of modular setup. We have modular security, right? So we have what we have a lot of acronyms here at Hyperlane, sorry, but we have
Don't worry, we do
ISMs,
too. We do too.
which are interchain security modules. Those allow devs to, configure, compose, and customize their security, as they wish, right? Based on their application's needs, or if you're an asset issuer or otherwise. So essentially, these ISMs are just smart contracts that are responsible for verifying that these messages are delivered on the destination chain, et cetera. And that, is a pretty simple process there. But the idea is that even though we might have a default interchain security module, there's a lot of different flexible interchain security modules that are possible. So we have standard ISMs. So maybe I can give you a few examples, right? So we have validators. Everybody is probably, familiar with what a quorum looks like with validators for verification. That's the case on many of our default chains, right? We also have, that's what we call a multi-sig ISM. We have routing ISMs, we have aggregation ISMs. We have a partner called Renzo, right? Who's an asset issuer, ETH derivative, liquid restaking token. And they said, hey, we want to work closely with you guys at Hyperlane, but we want to use our own validator set, and we want to run our own validator. And the other validators that we want in our quorum, we want those to be other, validators that we know, like P2P or Figment or whoever that might be. And they were able to do that with us, right? So for Renzo, across any of these 100 chains that we support, for any of the ones that they're deployed on, which is like I think 18 at this point, they can have a specific customizable validator set. So basically a custom security module specifically for their asset that is programmatically set within the contracts, if that tracks, Adam. So it's kind of like the world is your oyster when it comes to these ISMs. We're working on an ISM marketplace. We're working on something with Succinct and SP1 for zero knowledge verification, um, things of that nature. But we have, I don't know, probably like 15 or 20 different interchain security modules. We have pausable interchain security modules. We have rate limited multi-sig interchain security modules, basically like saying, depending on how big the transaction is, it can, execute X, Y, or Z kind of functions there. We've talked about interchain account routing security modules, et cetera. So we try to be as open and flexible as possible to provide the best developer experience, right? We want to, I feel quite strongly here that like there's not a developer who's going to go look at Hyperlane and necessarily be like, hey, I don't see you guys have this. And we say that's impossible. Right. So hopefully that makes sense, Adam.
It totally does, and I'm cautious because I'm not sure I'm gonna like let slip something secret here, Cam. So expand on this if applicable. But for anyone wondering, on the Radix side, we're running with the I believe what do you call your default validator set for the messaging to and from Radix is how we've got that set up initially.
Yes, it is. I mean, that's what a lot of people use. But I mean, you can even create your own ISM. I think we even have a place in the docs that is like says create your own interchain security module, right? And you can do that, via command line interface and things like that. So we will hopefully that gives you the picture here. We take it very seriously. We think we're best in class in terms of the tooling here. But that's a major part of our kind of quote unquote modular infrastructure, is the flexibility you can have with your security setup, right? Because it's different, if you're a meme token as an asset issuer, if you're an ETH derivative, if you're a new L1, if you're, I don't know, Coinbase or Anchorage, a custodian, or right, like these questions always come up, and we want to provide as much flexibility as possible to accommodate these different types of cases.
Awesome. I'm aware we're up at time, Cam, so I'd like to just ask one final question. With the builder
Yeah, yeah,
focus
all good.
that you've had around this, is if you could give one piece of advice to Radix builders who are tuning in today to really leverage what's being deployed with Hyperlane, what would that advice be?
This is gonna sound super cringy, but like think big or bigger. Like dive into the docs. I think I've described probably ad nauseum now, like how flexible things are in a lot of the different use cases that we can highlight. But you guys now have 150 other chains that you can send messages back and forth from in a safe, secure, fast, efficient manner, right? You can permissionlessly use the command line interface to create your own token bridges within minutes, right? I think that a number of use cases and hopefully creative juices can start flowing now that your team and your community know that this is just here, right? Like you can take like hopefully like some excitement, but also be a sigh of relief or otherwise, right? That like this has been solved in a way, which I think is like a key component to growing any kind of ecosystem. Especially if you're a kind of non-standard L1. So I think like take a look at the docs. We feel like we have a great developer experience there. I think users, we've mentioned some of the incentives and use cases that you can kind of go off of, but I hope that there's even more creative use cases that we haven't really seen that can be, kind of crafted by the people that are on this call or otherwise, your team and your ecosystem at Radix as well.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that, Cam, is from a Radix specific side is we had our last major protocol update added something called subintents in, and I know there's some devs in the community who have started playing around with those, especially in the last couple of months, and I think there's some really exciting things that can be done once Hyperlane is live, utilizing subintents. And I know that's going to be sparking a bunch of ideas for a bunch of people tuning in, but that's one area where I think also from the Hyperlane side, you could see some really interesting things come out that are pretty unique to what we can do with subintents on Radix. So that's what I'd suggest there. So Cam, that was kind of all the questions. Thank you very much for coming on. Any closing thoughts from your side? Oh, obviously, people go and follow Cam on X and Hyperlane. Anywhere else people should go and check out Hyperlane? Anything they should do other than prepare a whole bunch of assets from any of the 150 plus chains you support, ready to bridge over when you're live on the Radix mainnet?
um, I think you pretty much covered it there. I think look, we're going to incentivize this on both sides to make it, I think, worth everyone's time. There's going to be bootstrapping that's going to be in place. We're going to have a pretty compelling go-to-market here. I think, I don't know how much in alpha there is, Adam, but soon. Classic
Soon.
crypto phrase.
Yeah, soon. So
Soon.
Fabian,
Um,
because I was on a call with Fabian and the tech team prior to this space, and he asked me whether we could reveal the things, and we were both a bit like, oh, we probably could, but maybe we won't. So I think we're going to keep it a hush hush for now, but soon. Um, uh,
very soon. I'll add a very
yeah,
there
very,
for everybody.
very soon. We're in deployment. We're like deployment timeline was what was being discussed today. So all going
Yeah,
all
I would
going through
say
there.
like just keep in touch, look through our docs. We're very open to feedback. Use myself and my team and hopefully Adam and the Radix team as well for any kind of questions. We want people to be building interesting use cases and applications based on the tooling that we have. If it's simply you have a token that you want to bridge, or you have a lending protocol or some DeFi vault that you want to deploy on Radix, and now you have all the flows possible for what you need. That's awesome too. So it doesn't have to be esoteric in terms of like the depths of our docs to figure out a unique use case, but I hope that we have a wide enough menu of options within our toolkit that we have in our framework that um, makes it very exciting for everyone to be able to have this in place very soon.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would just add to the Radix community who are tuning in, you made a point about being able to deploy wall brutes and stuff like that. So the planned kind of rollout that we have coming very soon, as Cam said, is that we are going to be going live with kind of like wrap BTC, USDC, ETH initially. We are going to then plan to support those immediately within the Radix incentive campaign, and then bring in more assets into that Radix incentive campaign, and obviously on the Hyperlane side as well off the back of that. So as keen as everyone will be, if everyone goes and creates like 300 different ward groups day one, they won't be in the incentive campaign immediately, but we do have a plan to roll those out as well. So what we go live with is in no means the end of that journey. It is truly the start of that. So lots of exciting things coming as we go through, and hopefully we can have you back on a space in a couple of weeks to a couple of months to talk about what a roaring success the Radix launch was.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. pleasure to be here. Very excited for what we have upcoming, and happy to be partnered with you and your ecosystem.
Thank you very much for coming on. Any questions anyone has, make sure you ping them over on X, and it's at Hyperlane, I do believe. Cam, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
That was a very quickly like checking just to make doubly triply sure. I've done that more than once. No matter how many times you say it, you're never quite sure if it's exactly correct, especially in crypto where there's so many like Adam underscore XRD2 and stuff like that exist that are scammers. It's a nightmare. But yeah, thank you very much everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Cam, for joining us, and we will see you all next week.
All right. Ciao, everybody. See ya.